Welcome to the Northeast Kingdom Voice. I'm your host, Scott Wheeler. Today's guest is Fernando Beltran. Did I get that right?
You did.
He is newly retired from the U.S. Border Patrol. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Scott.
How's retirement been?
Well, you know, I actually...
Like 2 days?
I actually had to take another job because my wife left me a honey-do list, and she kept coming home every day and saying, "How'd you do on that list?" And I hated to see that disappointment in her eyes when I told her I didn't do much of it. But no, it's just, you know, it's something I love to do for over 30 years, and, you know, it's, I still miss a little bit of the day-to-day interaction with the fellas, you know, so, yeah, it's but, you know, it's also you know, a relief.
Yeah, you don't have to.
I don't have to stay up at night wondering if everything's okay, or listening to my radio at night.
Right. You know, the reason we were joking about, did I say it right, your name? I know when you first arrived here and we first met, I don't think I'm the first one who probably pronounced it Bertrand, because we do have Bertrands around here, but it's Beltran.
Correct. Everybody, when I first got here, liked to add an R and a D to my name.
Vermonters add letters to words that shouldn't even be there anyways.
One of my, you know, favorite people here in Vermont that I used to hang out with or talk to anyway, and he'd always tell me, you know, you see what Bomber did? And I'm like, Bomber? I was like, Bomber, the president, Bomber. You know, it's like, oh, Obama. Okay, I get you now. I follow you. But, you know, yeah, I love the way things change, and, you know, the funny thing is that you're talking to another Vermonter and they understand exactly what you're saying.
Oh yeah, it's like, for example, I know at your retirement party, I was, you know, I told people that I was your interpreter when you first came here. You were fluent in English, but you weren't so fluent in Northeast Kingdomite language, and so I had to translate. It's like, for example, the town name Barton is any sane person. It's Barton, but we pronounce it Barton. We forget the T, and we add R's where R's don't even exist. But, you know, you've lived around the United States, so you've probably heard different dialects.
Oh, it's always, you know, different parts of, I was in Minnesota, and every sentence there is ended with A,
Yeah.
you know.
Or you betcha.
You betcha, exactly. You know,
Hey.
so it is every, I think every region of the country has its own little, you know, thing they put into the language, and it's awesome, you know, that you can go anywhere and everybody has their own little quirks, and I find it, you know, interesting.
I know I was talking to your son. You don't have one son?
One son, yeah.
One son. I was talking to him at the retirement party, and he mentioned the one thing he notices, wicked.
Wicked.
Yeah, you know, something can be wicked good. Well, wait a minute here. Wicked and good typically cancels out each other. But the thing is so you came here in 2005. So who is Fernando Beltran? You've been on my show. You've been a guest speaker with me, but you started with the service, the Border Patrol, 30 years ago?
Yep. I started in Yuma, Arizona, and it's funny because you asked me that, and I said to someone once, they asked me who I was, and I said, well, I'm Fernando Beltran, I'm a Border Patrol agent. The guy said, let me stop you right there, you know. That tells me what you do. That doesn't tell me who you are. And thinking about it, I said, well, I'm a son, a brother, a husband, a father, a grandfather now. My daughter made me a grandfather a couple months ago, 3 months ago, little Silas. Silas John is my first grandson, or first grandchild.
They're a ball, by the way, grandkids.
Yeah, they are. I go down there, you know, he's been 3 months old. I've probably been down there 4 times. He's out in Louisville, Kentucky. And I said, and a friend. I'm a friend to many, and I hope I'm as good a friend to them as they've been to me. I have friends all over the country. It's one of the great things about this job is like, we spread people out all over the country. You start in one area, doesn't mean that's where you'll finish. And I started out in Arizona, went to Texas, and I came up here. And, it's a joy to be able to. I brought my kids up here, and I thought, they'd miss Texas so much that, they'd want to migrate back there. You see, a lot of folks that I grew up around, like, I grew up in the Rio Grande Valley of Texas, and that's probably one of the, traditionally has one of the all-time highest unemployment rates. And people just won't leave, to look for jobs or anything, because that's home.
It's kind of like here.
Yeah, it's the same thing. I find that here also. I remember when I first got here, people say, "Hey, we're getting a Walmart." As soon as Walmart comes here, I'm going to get a job. 10 years later, Walmart finally gets here, and those people are still in the area. They wouldn't leave somewhere to look for a job because this is home.
Here.
This is home, and I understand that. So when I brought my kids here, I thought they'd go back to Texas, as soon as they could, and look at, like I said, my daughter ended up. She lives in Louisville, Kentucky. My youngest daughter is going to school at Asbury College, which is in Wilmer, Kentucky, and she thinks that that's where she wants to end up, in the Louisville, not Louisville, but Lexington area. So it's amazing that when I was growing up as a youngster at home, we were migrant farm workers. And migrant means that we followed the crops, not like, one of our previous governors, migrant was illegal aliens. That's not the same thing. Illegal aliens are illegal aliens.
Right.
I was a migrant farm worker, which means we followed crops throughout the summer, spring and summer, fall. I got to see a lot of the country, so there was a lot of places other than South Texas. Even though I love South Texas, there's a lot of other places that I said, I could see myself living here. As a matter of fact, my dad, my mom settled in a little town called Sleepy Eye, Minnesota. And that's where they, my mom passed away there a few years ago, and now my dad doesn't want to leave because, that's where she's at.
And you were born in Oregon, just on the circuit, right?
Yeah, I was born in Salem, Oregon. We were up there ready for this. To pick strawberries was the first thing that would come, that was the first crop that would come up in the spring. So we were there, Salem, Oregon, and that's when I was born. And I have a sister that was born in Ada, Minnesota, and a brother born in Defiance, Ohio. I mean, we traveled the country, so I was able to see all these places. And I see down in Texas there was a lot of people that have never been out of the state, or maybe on a vacation or something,
Right.
But never to live in another community and see how that community interacts. And when I brought my kids up here, I said I got my son's in Burlington, and I don't think I may not be able to get him out of there. He loves Burlington, he loves the area. And,
Well, he's close to Vermont.
Yeah.
That's what they say is, Burlington is close to Vermont. But I remember what you were saying is growing up on the migrant circuit back in those days. You experienced a lot of racism along the way, like we don't feed Mexicans and that.
Yeah.
So naturally, when you decided, if I recall right, I think it was natural when you were raising your kids, you didn't want them to experience what you experienced. So when it was suggested that you might want to settle in one of the whitest states in the union, you were a little hesitant at first.
I was. I came up here and I said, my kids, we came from a community in Laredo, Texas that was 98% Hispanic.
Right.
And the small percentage of white people that lived there spoke Spanish. So everybody, I don't think my kids ever grew up seeing color or we never taught that at home, so when I came up here, I was a little bit, cautious about what my kids might run into and how I would handle it, and people told me, Vermonters are very standoffish. You're going to get up there, and if you're an outsider, they're not going to like you, and this, that, and the other, and I've always been a very home is where you hang your hat type of person. So I said, as long as my family's together, we figured we'd be all right. And we came up here and found quite the opposite. People here were welcoming and friendly, and I really thought I'd be here a couple years and then bounce back to the southern border somewhere. Here it was 11 years. I finished my career here, and I'm still here. I'm the only reason I would leave, or we're not even considering leaving, more of getting a winter home down in Kentucky where my
So your wife has come a long ways then, because I remember when you first got here, she'd never experienced winters before, right? And so, because she actually, I got the idea that this was like a short-term gig to help you maybe get a little mobility. And did she fall into love with the area too?
Well, tell you what, she loves it here in the summer.
Yeah.
In the winter, she doesn't love it so much, but
neither do I, though.
She has grown accustomed to winters, and she deals with them. We came up here. She has prospered in her job with the post office, and has gotten some opportunities she may not have had, on the southern border. And she does well here. She works down at the White River Junction plant. She manages the White River Junction plant, and she saw the opportunity that our kids had here, and I think that overcomes a lot of things. The St. Johnsbury Academy, where my kids went to school, was an awesome school for them. It provided a lot of opportunities. Just the whole community up here, and like my kids made friends so easily, and we had kids over at our house all the time, and it was such a warm embrace from the community when we got here.
That's it. And like, for example, I remember going out on patrol with you a few times, and no matter where we went, you found a friend. I remember Mr. Goodrow and Mr. and Mrs. Goodrow.
Yeah.
We were
John and Denise.
Yeah, we were. We stopped in, and I if I recall right, we got some kind of. Before we left, was it dried maples?
Maple sugar.
Yeah, maple sugar that they sent us on. And was it him that you one time you saw him trying to put some fencing up, and you stopped and helped him? And wasn't it him, or was it somebody else?
He was trying to put up a fence, and I asked him if he'd done it yet. He said he couldn't find anybody to help him. So I said, well, what time do you want to put it up? And I came over, and we took his tractor out and put up some fencing, that he'd been wanting to do for a while, and we got it done. And yep, he's a good man.
Right. Well, I think that's one thing that's lacking in some lawmen today, lawmen and law women, is just because you have a job to do doesn't make you any better. Doesn't mean you have to act like you're high and mighty. I think sometimes when you get out there and you really get to know people, even what some people might view as undesirables, talk to them. As you might find out they're not as bad as you think, or by forming a relationship with them, sometimes they're going to tell you information about other people who are doing things wrong.
I keep emphasizing community. It's all about, we're all members of the same community. Right. Whatever your status may be. It's like I like to talk to people. It doesn't matter. Sometimes I embarrass my kids. Go to the mall. They come out. I'm on the bench talking to somebody, and they'll look at me like, "Who's that?"
I think that's why we got along so well.
I say, I don't know. I just met him.
Yeah.
I don't know if you remember this, but the first time I met you was in the parking lot at Price Shop.
Oh yeah, I didn't have a clue who you were.
I said, "Hey, you're Scott Wheeler, and did you write this book?" I was talking to you about your book.
Yeah, I had no idea who you were.
You had no idea who I was, and I had seen your book, and I had.
That must have been Rum Runners.
Yeah, Rum Runners and Revenuers, and I was just talking to you about it, and then I introduced myself, and that's
then
the
it was
first
ever
time
since.
Yeah, it's ever since. But that's where I first met you.
Right,
in the parking lot at at Price Chopper.
Then we started occasionally staking out roasters.
Yeah, roasters.
Going up to roasters. You went on, because your other sideline is you are a master cook. What, smoking it, smoking meat. You even catered one of my son's wedding receptions. And do you still do that in retirement?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I will do graduation parties. I did my daughter's graduation party. Had a bunch of people over. I did my daughter's wedding, your wedding. I've done a couple other graduation parties.
Don't say my wedding. You might confuse my wife.
Your son's
because
wedding.
that wasn't 30 years ago, and I don't practice polygamy.
I apologize, Penny. But no, yeah, I do it. It's something that I learned with the Border Patrol. Down in Texas, and I have a couple of smokers that I work with, and
yeah, but these aren't just like little smoke. You have them on your.
No,
they're trailers.
Well, with
them.
my original smoker, I catered the grand opening of our station when we opened the station here, and that was like we made enough food for 350 people. We fed 350 people, and if I remember correctly, at your wedding, your son's wedding. It was like 75 people, and then I cooked for you, and then you came and said, "You must be people in Texas eat a lot more."
Yeah, because it was great. I'll tell you, your coleslaw was outstanding too. Your coleslaw, your meat, and I remember thinking, I said, "Hey, did you give us too much, or did we just not?" The funny thing is, the one story you told me that I'll always remember, and you told it you kind of told it at your retirement is, you get up here and, all right, explain what a barbecue means in Texas. What is a barbecue?
Well, a barbecue consists of it's going to be a lot of meat, chicken, brisket, pork. And when
it's a long event.
Yeah,
it's
you're going to come out there, and then everybody brings sides, and it's like,
right.
Either it's usually rice and beans and potato salads and what have you. And so my first barbecue here, they invited me to a barbecue. And it's
so you're expecting what?
Yeah, so we were expecting, a lot of food and a lot of, fire. Everything starts with fire. So we brought some rice and beans. So I'll make some rice, or my wife made rice, I made beans, and said, we'll come out. And we get there, and there's hot dogs. And hamburgers on the grill, and then I'm looking around, and it's like I think I actually had bought some steaks to throw on the grill. It's like and it's like it wasn't that kind of barbecue.
Right.
And I remember telling the guy who was throwing the barbecue, I said, we do this in Texas, for the kids. Because the kids are like, they're hungry now.
Right.
So it's like you throw hot dogs and burgers on there, and then just the kids will all eat. Well, the meat takes a lot longer to cook, and there's a lot of beer drinking, and I don't drink, and personally, but more power to those that do. So it's a lot of beer drinking and telling stories over the fire as you barbecue, and a lot of it's slow barbecuing and. Yeah, so it was different. So this is not a barbecue. This is like you're grilling out. That's what it is,
Right. Yeah, no, that's it. One thing you haven't been able to convince me of, and neither has my wife been able to convince me. Sorry, I still don't like. I love your cooking. I love your smoked meat, your everything. But once you start really getting heavy into the Mexican part. I've tried to like Mexican really. I've gone to restaurants. My wife has brought me, but I'm still just a meat. Well, I'm not quite a meat and potatoes guy, but Mexican is not my favorite.
It's. I was telling you when you went to Arizona. Because you're going to be in some of the best, Mexican cuisines there are.
And we went to them.
And you said that you just couldn't do it.
No, I went, but I couldn't. I just couldn't.
So it's it's kind of like me when I came up here. I go to Canada,
right.
And I go over. I have a lot of Canadian friends with the RCMP, and we go over to eat in Canadian establishments and stuff, and I find everything up there very bland.
Right.
It's like not enough spices for me. And so it's not. Sometimes in the Mexican cuisine, there's a lot of spice, and and some people don't like the mixture of flavors. I mean, I grew up, and I tell people sometimes they say, well, ask me if I cook Mexican. I say, well, I'm from Texas, so it's more of a Tex-Mex. It's like in Mexico, like if you go to Mexico and order nachos, nachos are not a Mexican traditional dish. That's something that we invented in the United States. Nachos and burritos. I mean, you're not going to find that in traditional Mexican restaurants. It's stuff that was became popular in the United States.
Right, it's kind of like
Mexican
Chinese food. If
Yep.
if I have friends who've traveled or lived in China, and they will tell you if you went to a Chinese restaurant here and went over and tried to order the same thing over there, it's like,
General Tao's chicken.
yeah, they're gonna like, "Oh, what's that?" You've seen a lot of change with the Border Patrol. Like when you started, there wasn't really even many of you.
Well, when I was hired, I was one of. They were going to hire 500 agents to boost the total number of Border Patrol agents to 1,500.
And what are we at now about?
Well, the last, I think we're around 22,000 agents nationwide, and in the 30 years, in the 30 years I was in, our goal has always been the same: keep America safe. I mean, that's our priority. I see all the new the president-elect or the president. Everybody's talking about well, immigration this and immigration that. In the 30 years I was in, for the first time in my career under the Obama administration, we were basically told not if we encountered an illegal alien in this country, and we ran his records, fingerprints, we vetted him, and there was no derogatory information. In other words, this guy, drunk driving, wasn't considered a, criminal offense. So if he didn't have a criminal record, then we didn't even process him. We just released him out, and ever since I came in, we'd always take an alien's fingerprints, his mugshot. We processed his data, his biographical data, and entered it into our computer system. So if somebody catches that guy down the road, we know that he's, where he is apprehended or that he's in our system. And under Obama's my last year in the service there, we were instructed not to arrest these people if they had no criminal record. I mean, we vet them through the FBI, NCIC in the States, and if we can't find anything derogatory on them, then we just basically let them out the door.
And I know we've talked about this, and that the vast majority of people coming into this country, whether legally or illegally, they're decent people. But you will tell you that a lot of us people, especially here on the northern border, we live in la-la land because we do live in a safe place. The world here isn't, the world on this border is not the same as the world on the southern border. But sometimes we're letting our guard down, from what I understand. That just because we're here doesn't mean there isn't some really bad stuff going on.
When I first came up here, I keep in touch with a lot of people on the southern border. I got a lot of good friends all over the country, and they'd say, I would always refer to this area as Mayberry.
Yeah.
This is like I said, if you bring your kids here, man, it's like growing up in Mayberry, man. This is something that it really is unheard of on the southern border. On the southern border, there are people that would call us. They live right along the river, and they put their clothes out to dry, and then they come out an hour later, all their clothes is gone, and it'd be like, I can understand that they took a pair of pants or a shirt, because if they came up from the river and didn't have any clothes, sometimes when they put all their clothing, they strip down, they put all their clothing in a plastic bag, and they try to swim across with it, you know. So let's say you get into, you know, where you get into a current or something and you're struggling, they let go of the clothing so they can, you know, preserve life and make it across. So then they come out and they have nothing. So they see somebody's laundry on the line and they go in there and like the people would say, hey, you need a pair of pants, take the pants, take a shirt. I said, but why take everything? You know, and you know, just think of it. You know, your family's clothing out on the clothing line. You come out and it's all gone. I mean, here you could probably leave it out there for 2 days and, or you know, longer, and it would be there when you came back. Right. So I go home from here. I go home to Texas, and I would tell people right now. I says I got lawnmowers, ATVs, you know, in my barn, and I'm way down here, and I'm really not worried that when I get back, it won't be there. You know, where down there it's like, I mean, I remember taking my daughter home, and well, she's 20 years old now. Her name's Stephanie, and we went down there, and she's like, she was about 10 or 12, and she's like, why does everybody have bars on the windows? Every home down there has bars on the windows, you know. And I said, because people like their stuff, you know. If you don't have them, it's like an invitation, like, hey, that's an easy place to break into, you know. And you know, a lot of that crime is, you know, is cross-border. El Paso, Texas, they led the nation in stolen vehicles, pickup trucks especially. Every night there'd be, you know, 20, 30 trucks stolen, you know, overnight. So Sylvester Reyes was the chief of the Border Patrol at the time down there. He's a representative for the state of Texas now. He started, you know, like an operation where he put Border Patrol on the line front and center 24 hours a day. Overnight, you know, the stolen 20, 30 pickup trucks a night went down to 2. You know, so what's that tell you? I mean, all those trucks were being stolen and driven back into Mexico because they're big money items down there. They're very popular. I mean, it's like, so you come in, you steal it, and you take it back. So a lot of other cities followed suit, you know, with the Border Patrol on the front line to, you know, police the community, make it a safer, you know, place to live. And see, we don't have those types of, you know, problems here.
Right. You know, up here, up here, as you found out, is even when you, most people who live here, even the bad people, are not really that bad, you know, in the grand scheme of things. And like, I know, I've even written about, and you mentioned it on the at your retirement party, is, you know, because for rightly or wrongly, you had to take some heat for Operation Stone Guard, and we won't go into our differences on that. We differ a little bit, but the thing is, what you found out, and I tried to tell this to a former boss of mine, but he just didn't get it. But you did, is somebody can be hollering at you. They can be really passionate, not believe in what you're doing, but they don't hate you. They want to get their point across. And that happened, you know, I remember how touched you were when the Derby Line trustees, who, you know, for right or wrong, you know, they had to rake you over the coals. And then when your mother died, you don't even know how they found out she died. They sent you a card.
They did, you know, and it was almost like the week before we had left a heated meeting, you know, councilmen's meeting at the, or board of trustees meeting, and you come out of there, you know, it's like, you know, spitting fire, you know, in both directions. You know, I mean, obviously, you know, I've always told people you can't do what we do in law enforcement, you know, without compassion and thick skin. You know, I mean, people are going to say things about you. I remember one of the councilmen in letter or article in the Caledonia compared me to the Gestapo. And then I remember talking to him and said, you know what? I said, stuff like that does not bother me, doesn't hurt me. I said, but when my kids read that, and they're like, they're asking me, Dad, why would they say, your kids, my kids know me, and they know that I'm not a bad person. So when they read something like that somebody's, it's in the paper because it was printed as, a lot of people say, well, if it's in the paper, it must be true, right? So they read that and says, they're comparing me to the Gestapo, and it's like destroying the village of Derby Line, because it would be like if Osama bin Laden himself had set off a bomb there and destroyed the community. And it's like, I said, well, I don't know. I says, I would tell my kids, the beautiful thing about this country and the things that I protect is that I protect his right to say what's on his mind. And if that's what he's thinking, true or not. So that's his opinion. And we live in a country where you can say what you want. I said, and my kids would say, why don't you? I said, because, says that's not me, and I don't talk. I wouldn't say that to bring my point across. I would just put out my point, and it's like and emphasize the safety of this country. And I remember telling them, my responsibility as the PIC of the Border Patrol in this area is not for the security of Derby Line. It's the security of the nation. Right. It's bigger than Derby Line. It's bigger than me. I said, we got to look at the big pictures. We don't want anybody coming through here where it can be, you can track things back. And they said, well, where did they enter? They entered right through Derby Line, because of these side streets which were an issue at the time. And, when a week after we'd had this heated debate, my mom passed away, and I left, and I actually left, and she passed away that evening when I got there. I was surprised by two things. During my mom's funeral, two agents showed up, Eric LaValle and Denny Welch he was a PIC in Beecher Falls. I look, I get up to, give the eulogy, and I look up, and there's two Border Patrolmen standing in the back, and that just, I kind of lost it there for a little bit, because this is a good organization that I work for, and it's like they care for their employees, and it was touching. So then I get home and I find a letter, or a card signed by all the trustees, saying, hey, I still have it, and they all signed it and passed the condolences on to me, and even, didn't stop there. I mean, when I'd see them, Buzzy Roy, Karen Jenny, Keith Beadle, we'd see him out there in Perry.
Yep.
I'd run into him, and
Perry
they
Hunt.
Hunt, yeah, and they personally come up to me and just say, hey, pass along their condolences, and I was very touched that these guys, even though heated words and things are exchanged in that meeting room, I mean, it ends there. They don't hold that. It's not hate. I think I think it was just more of a not wanting to change things, And I remember, Keith would bring out magazines from, Vermont Life from the 60s. So we, how the border was portrayed as a, neighborly community, and like one big community, and we shared a bunch of things, sewer systems, water systems. And I said, yeah, but, Keith, I mean, gas back then was 18 cents a gallon. I'd love to be back there. So, we didn't have cell phones, we didn't have microwaves, we didn't have big screen TVs, with progress, things change. And it's like, we'd all love for it to be, 1965 again. So, but unfortunately it's not, that's all changed.
And you know, as much as we locals think it has changed, because it was a different world, and you know, you could go across the border a lot easier. You know, a lot of people don't realize Border Patrol are not the people who are stationed at the border.
Nope.
And so you guys do the roving patrols, but things, you know, things have changed. Yet on the other hand, is, as you know, I'm contacted quite often by the foreign press who want to do an interview, and they often want to stand. And you and I have been involved in several of them together, but they love the concept of standing in front of the Haskell. And like the Koreans, actually, Kate On from the Korean broadcast system, I believe it's called, she came on my show while she was up here, but she and her workers, they're Korean, and they came way up here from Washington D.C. because they heard about these flower pots guarding the border, and she said, you don't see stuff like that on the border between South and North Korea. And they just like, wow, this is what's. And you know, I've often thought that you know, we ought to capitalize a little bit more, Derby line, on these flower pots, because people come, we take it for granted, but these three, they were like, this is unbelievable. But then I think we both worked with some reporters from, yeah, we did, from one of the Russian republics.
Kyrgyzstan.
Yeah, I'll let you say it. And the thing is they thought I remember, they thought Americans were insanely nice. No matter where they went in this country, you know, because you always hear about how horrible Americans are. They came here with a concept on who Americans were, and they could not believe it. They got off in New York, met a member of the, he was a federal employee, he picked him up.
From the State Department.
State Department, and the guy was like us, we like people, and the guy, you know, got them in a taxi, New York City, and so he's up front yucking it up with the taxi driver. And they got out of the car, and their interpreter said to me, he got out of the car, and we said to him, who was that? Do you know him? No. Well, what were you doing talking to him? And he said, wherever they went in this country, people were so nice. Now, I think they actually thought the Northeast Kingdom was insanely nice to them, but they were saying that if they went back to their country and were so nice to people, strangers, as they were treated, that they might actually end up in the happy house for a while, because they said that they would be viewed almost as insane, because they said in their country, you just go about your life, you look straight ahead or you look down and you go, and when you're in the store line, you don't sit there talking to somebody, you just, and so they just loved this country.
They did. They thought the greatest thing. I took them over to get some ice cream, you know, and they couldn't believe the portion size. You know, it's like, and then they were just like, you know, people were, you know, chit chatting away, you know, while they were waiting in line, and yeah, they thought that was, you know, amazing at the friendliness of the whole Northeast Kingdom.
Yeah, and you know, I expect that from the Northeast Kingdom, but they also thought that you know, just wherever they went in this country, they will say there was a stark contrast, because you know, they also visited the southern border.
Yeah, they went to Arizona,
and they were like, that was a totally different world, they said, compared to the northern border. And but still, though, they said on the southern border, people were just insanely nice to them. But I've often thought, though, because as we were saying, I've been interviewed and you've been interviewed by people from around the world. I often think, how do you translate some of my Vermontisms into all these foreign languages? Because sometimes Vermonters don't even understand the Northeast Kingdom.
Oh, you know, it is a language all to itself, but I'm sure there's a way to translate it.
Right. So So you were in. So you came here in 2005. But 2001. That must have been a milestone moment for you. You know, the terrorist attacks.
I remember I'd worked I worked the 4 to midnight shift, and we'd been so busy. We had a case that we just didn't get to process, And I told the guys, hey, put it on ice. Means just put the smuggling group in a cell, put the smuggler in a separate cell, put a note on there not to get rid of them. And tomorrow, we were working like a 3 to 11 shift, and it was already like 4 in the morning. And it's like, okay, it's time to go home, guys. Just leave it there, and we'll come in early tomorrow. And the 2 guys that had caught it, so you guys, instead of coming in at 3, come in at 2, start on it, and then we'll. So then I woke up and I called the station to explain why we left them there. And then they're like, talking about it's incredible. So, all this crap that's happening. It's like, what are you guys talking about? I said, have you been watching TV? He says, I just woke up. I said, turn the TV on. And that was when the first plane had crashed.
Right.
So I turned it on in time to see the second plane crash. And then it was like all hands on deck, I mean, I got in uniform and I headed into the station, even though, I wasn't on duty or anything, but it's kind of like, I mean, we came in and formulated a plan, and they said, okay, they shut down all flights across the country, and then one of the assistant chiefs, a guy named George Gano, came up to me and says, hey, pick 30 good men. And says, you guys, are going to be taking off here in a couple hours. So I started calling guys, who wanted to go with me, and I said, hey, this is not the detail where we go to go have fun. So this is going to be, I don't know what's going to happen. This is our country's just been attacked, and we're meant to go secure airports. We went to the group I had went to Dallas Fort Worth. It ended up being 60 total, and we'd work 7 to 7, 12 hours on, 12 hours off every day, no days off. And I had a great group of guys there, and it was somber for a while. When we first opened up the airports, people were coming through there. They would have let you strip search them, And after a couple of weeks, we were such a forgetful nation. They were like, the pilots were like, this is, bull crap. Why do I have to, and we're looking at these guys. Is this for your protection? You're the guys and this is way overboard. This is, it's like, and then I looked at my agents and I remember saying, how quickly we forget. It's like, and a thing I like to point out is like back then, the security. This is before TSA. Everybody makes fun of TSA now and all these failures they have and all these tests that they miss and stuff, But back then, like in Dallas Fort Worth, for example, all the screeners were Somalian. They didn't even speak English. You had one guy there, and well, after 9/11, they actually put like a company guy there who was American, and he was through a Somalian translator trying to get them to do, make sure they were checking everything. And it was kind of like, that was, throughout the country. Those jobs were not thought of as, something that you or I would do.
Right.
So you had a lot of, foreigners doing that screening.
Right.
So, yeah, when TSA came along, it changed everything changed. I mean, everything changed, and it's like sometimes, like I said, we're a very reactive society, especially in the government, law enforcement. It's like there's all these things that aren't being done, and as soon as something happens, then we react to it, and sometimes we react. I mean, people here talk about the checkpoints that went on for almost a year or a year and a half, you know, where they had the checkpoints in White River Junction every day.
Yeah.
You know, now, you know, it comes back, and you know, people think like, you know, our senators, they don't think that that checkpoint was, every time we put it up, it was very productive. But people call their senator, Leahy, and he doesn't, you know, he sides with them and says, hey, we're 98% white in Vermont, why do we need a checkpoint? And it's like, you know, they just don't get it. You know, you're not looking for, you know, the color of people's skin, you know.
Right.
You're looking for, you know, their intent.
So when you came up here, up to, well, I know you call it the Newport Station, even though I keep reminding you it's actually in Derby. On the Citizens Road. And why do they call it the Newport Station? Because it has a Newport mailing address?
Newport mailing address, Newport phone number.
Right, I guess that's true. So, but when you came up here, you had a small office, and how many patrol officers?
Well, it has grown by over twice as many as I had when I first got here. You know, agents. Heck, it might grow even more when the new president, you know, decides to beef up the northern border.
I hope. I don't think I think I could go for those flower pot walls and
well,
not.
You know, Scott, let me tell you, it's like when people think of the border patrol agents in this area, and I've talked to a couple of the retired guys. Brian McNeil, he's a good guy, you know, and I talked to Brian, you know, and
he doesn't have an opinion now.
Oh no, not Brian. No, but he's like, you know, there was 6 guys when he was here.
Right.
He goes, and we shut the border down when he was here with like 6 agents, you know. But they didn't work midnights. They didn't work nights, so it's kind of like, well, you know, so during the day nothing happened. I said, but you know, we don't live in that world anymore, Brian. And he's, like I said, he and I have conversations. Very, very nice guy. And in Laredo, where I left Laredo, there's 3 stations in town: Laredo North, Laredo South, and Laredo West. Mm-hmm. Each of those stations has about 300 to 400 agents. So there's 1,200 agents in that city. You know, so when you talk about the amount of agents we have here in this area, you know, I mean, it's not. And then on top of that, you know, you have about a 300-man police force. I mean, the city of Laredo is probably the population of the state of Vermont. Mm-hmm. You know, so you got a 300 to 400-man police force, 1,200 border patrol agents, probably another 100 sheriff's deputies, and another, you know, 30, 40 DPS troopers. Right. I mean, that's a lot of law enforcement concentrated in one area. You know, we're talking about a state here, and you know, the sense of security there is that, you know, they're probably you know, hire more people if they could.
Right. You know, and one thing I've often appreciated, I've worked with, in some capacity, with the Border Patrol. Okay, I used to be with the Chronicle years ago. There's some law enforcement outfits I kind of just like roll my eyes and think, really? You're big and bad, and you know, you can't even communicate with people, you know, because I think communication is a big deal for a lawman's job, because I just do. But the Border Patrol, even, you know, back in the days of John Pfeiffer, he was a chapter in one of my books, Runners and Revenuers, Prohibition of Vermont. I still have a high opinion of the U.S. Border Patrol, and it's just like they thought they had forgotten to invite me to your party, so I get an email or a call from Eric LaValle, and what's his title?
Well, right now he was the acting patrol agent in charge, or acting deputy patrol agent in charge, but he's a supervisor.
Well, he hadn't realized that you had already. I said, no, don't worry. Fernando's already invited me, and because I've had a great working relationship with the Border Patrol, I record the history of the region, and even when I disagreed with you guys, I think I've done it respectfully. I will still look at Operation Stone Garden and roll my eyes, and I'm sure you have a different view of it. And but we've often had a great relationship, and I often said that. You might disagree with me. I thought the Border Patrol often hired the best of the best. You have a few lemons in there occasionally, and but for the most part, I also think you police your own pretty well, unlike some other police departments.
Well, the training we go through and the vetting process before they hire a guy has always been top notch. And you're right. Some guys either get disenchanted or disconnected, whatever it is. I mean, you got to realize these guys also have relationships and and things of that nature, where one would say it shouldn't affect you, but I mean it does. You got to either marriage problems or problems with your kids or something, and you tend to bring that to work with you, and sometimes that doesn't bode well. But we do have the training is awesome, the camaraderie, and a lot of guys, they keep each other. It's checks and balances. They keep each other in line, and that's one of the wonderful things. It's probably the thing I miss the most is the camaraderie with all the
but
agents.
that probably, to some degree, that probably even lasts well into retirement.
Oh.
That relationship. Your new commander, he's introduced himself. Is it Stephen Hennessy?
Hennessy, yep.
What kind of guy is he? I won't tell anybody.
I'm tell you what. Steve is awesome. He's when I came in, to Newport, the relationship that had been set, in the years with our, force multipliers, the other law enforcement in the area, the community itself, I strive to improve that, keep it the same, improve it. And I know Steve is probably gonna be, he's gonna do a better job than I did. I mean, he is very down to earth. He knows the operation. He's got a vast experience running programs in a large sector like Tucson. That's where he came from. Tucson. We went to Washington D.C., so he's got knowledge of national programs. This is going to be a win-win for this community and for the Border Patrol station.
Yeah, I've already. He came right up to me, introduced himself, and I'd probably met him before, but while up there. But and I think he's going to be, probably once I don't know if he has to get permission. He's going to be coming on the show, and he does want to, because I think that's a big part of law enforcement. Also, just being human. I think I've had on every law enforcement agency on here. I have always struck out with the state police. I don't know if maybe I'm contacting the wrong person. I've reached out to them different times throughout the years, but they haven't been interested. I've had the sheriff's department on, Seth DeSanto from the Newport Police Department, and then before him, Paul.
Duquette?
Yeah, Duquette. I'm glad here I am. I'm the local guy, and you know all these names. Okay, as we wind down here, we hear so much bad about this country, and the fact of the matter is, a lot of times it's people who are saying bad, I find, for a political agenda. I know you were born, you were telling me, with a silver spoon in your mouth. You've never wanted for anything. No, in all seriousness, I tell people you've lived the American dream. You had every reason to do something bad with your life. You had the opportunity, didn't you?
Absolutely.
And you went from a migrant worker, which I really appreciate people who want to work with, because you probably have people on the migrant circuit that absolutely love doing what they do. But the thing is you went from a migrant worker to one of the, a very respected person, a ranking member of the Border Patrol. How did you manage to do that while other people just sit around and just wring their hands?
Well, I had parents that pushed me at every level. Whether like there was times that I wanted to drop out of school so I could help. There was six kids total. I was the oldest, and I wanted to drop out of school to work more so we could help the family. And my mom wouldn't let me. Education, and then when I got, when I graduated high school, I went into the military because, I knew that I couldn't go to college, with, and I wanted to, so I went to the Army under the Army's Be All You Can Be, and they had a college program in place, and so I went in, and then I got out of the military, and the college program didn't turn out to be as good as it is now. So that dream was kind of dashed, and then the Border Patrol was hiring, and it was my mother that told me, why don't you, I said, because I said, they're going to ask for college. I haven't gone to college. She goes, read this to me and tell me where it says college. I said, I'm reading it. I don't see college anywhere. I said, but when I get there, they're going to tell me. Yeah. So then she made me call, and I says, do I need a college degree or anything? She goes, no, high school degree and be a U.S. citizen, and they gave me be over 21. And she looked at me and said, okay, so what's stopping you now? So I applied, and then I got hired, and the rest is history. But it was my parents, that kept pushing us, all the kids, pushing us to be better than they were. They didn't want us to be working in the fields, and we were good at it. We were successful at that type of work, but it was like it's like my mom would say, you're better than that. Don't settle for this. Get out of here and do something better.
And one name we forgot, if I recall right, one reason you ended up here on the northern border was a former Border Patrol officer who is from here, now State Representative Gary Vians.
Yeah, Gary and I were good friends in Yuma, Arizona. When I first joined the Border Patrol there, he was one of the first guys I met. I don't think he's changed a bit.
He's about as shy as you are.
Yeah. He hasn't changed a bit, from when I first met him. I could hear his laugh anywhere and know that he was in the room somewhere. Yeah. And he was actually doing some training in Laredo, and I found out about that he was in town. So I said, hey, let's go out to dinner. And we went out to dinner, and he was asking me about how my career was going and stuff. And I said, well, I'm kind of stuck in a rut here because I wanted to get a promotion, and we'd gotten a new chief, and a lot of times when I've been here for a few years, so I work for a chief, and then he moves on. So this new guy that comes in, well, he doesn't know me from anybody, and he wants to surround himself with good people. And more than likely, when he starts promoting, he's going to bring people that he knows from wherever he came from. Right. And I said, it just doesn't look good for me. And he was like, well, have you ever thought of the northern border? It's like, nope. I never have. I said, well, he was here in Swanton sector, and he's like, hey, we have a job opening coming up there, so you might want to think about it, And that's what got me interested. The job was actually in Richford, and I said, yeah, I might. And he goes, no, you don't want Richford. He goes, nothing. He goes, the gem is the Border Patrol is Newport. I says that would be a great place for you to land. You should think about it. So I talked to my family, and we did it. I applied for it. I got the job, and I came up here, and like I said, fell in love with the area. I really thought I was going to be here a year or two, and then head back to Texas or Arizona, because my wife she liked Arizona. Well, she likes the hot weather. Right. And Arizona's plenty hot. And
well, it's hot here, up to 70. What?
Yeah.
70?
I remember my first summer here. They had a drive for fans because old people were having problems with staying cool, and I was like 70. So I used to tell people here. So how I knew it was going to be a hot day in Texas? I said I got up in the morning. It was 90. You know, and it's like early morning, and that feels cool. You know, you come out of your house, it's like, oh, it's 90 degrees. He says, yeah, it's going to be a warm one today.
Right. All right, in closing, we also found out we've been acquaintances, friends for several years now, but we're just talking. We're apparently just maybe we're identical twins separated at birth. We didn't realize that both of us share the same birthday, which is a day before we tape, which is February 8th. And
Exactly.
we'd never, I mentioned my birthday was coming up, and hey, that's my birthday. So even though I think you have a couple years on me.
I probably do.
Yeah, I think you do. Hey, it was great to have you on, and I know you're going to have an interest in second or third chapter of your life, or fourth. You'll have. I don't think you're going to let any grass grow underneath your feet.
Absolutely not. You know, I'm. We were talking the other day about a great American that just passed away, Joe Queenan.
Oh yeah.
And going down, you helped him with his obituary, and it's kind of like, you know, that man lived life to the fullest.
Oh, he did.
And he set an example for people like me, and it's like, you know what? There's nothing that's going to slow me down or keep me from doing other things, you know, as much as I can, even if it's, you know, I don't think I could ever be the volunteer he was at the hospital. I said, but, yeah, I mean, he set an example for all of us. You know, it's like, hey, you can sit around
And wait
at
to
home
die.
and grow old, wait to die, or live your life, you know, every
Yeah.
day.
And he did. He did. 2 weeks before he died, we were out having a beer at Pie and Pasta, and he says, Scott, I just feel my time's coming to an end. And he said, I just don't want to end up in a nursing home. And he wasn't sick, but he felt it coming, and he passed away. And, you know, hey, well, thank you for coming on, and thank you for your service to the country. And I look forward to remaining in contact with you and experiencing some of your great smoked food.
Absolutely. Happy birthday.
Happy birthday. Thank you for coming on.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
And thank you to the viewers for tuning in to another segment of the Northeast Kingdom Voice.